In the shadows of Sandy Creek, echoes of that fateful night, where life's lost and hearts that seek a semblance of the light.
The Sunday edition of the News Herald on January 23, 1977, warned its readers about the weather. It was raining and 15 degrees below freezing. It was too cold for anyone to be outside. Only the very daring would venture outdoors. Such was the case for a team of 14 smugglers attempting to offload 20 tons of Colombian marijuana at the mouth of Sandy Creek in eastern Bay County, Florida. The Gunsmoke, a 70-foot shrimp boat, had her bow pressed hard on a sandbar and her stern was facing the creek bank. As the first rays of dawn began peeking over a mass of dark clouds on the eastern horizon, the offloading of more than 600 bales of high-grade marijuana was getting underway. The operation was plagued with problems from the beginning. The Gunsmoke ran into a fierce storm in the southern Gulf. The high waves slowed the Gunsmoke's progress, and the fuel consumption almost doubled. Captain Peter von Stroop was extremely exhausted, and he was getting very worried. Captain Pete used the Marine Band radio to call Floyd Capo, supervisor of the operation, to relate their position and to estimate an arrival time. Floyd Capo called his son, Dave, who was in charge of the Sandy Creek element, to forward the bad news.
Captain Pete called over the radio to say the Gunsmoke would be delayed by a full day. That was bad enough, but he said he would need 6 barrels of fuel, too. That made me very nervous. How could we deliver that much fuel? I didn't even know where to start. Billy Joe said to ask David Goodwin. He was from the area, and maybe he could come up with a plan.
Billy Joe Vines gave Dave Cruz good advice. David Monroe Goodwin was from Bay County, and that was part of the reason why Billy Joe recruited him to participate in this illicit venture. David Goodwin did indeed make a good plan. He was able to calm Dave Cruz's nerves when he suggested that they use the John boats that Billy Joe had provided to transport the fuel to the Gunsmoke when they delivered their local pilot as already planned. The John boats came in extra handy that night. As planned, it was Bobby Joe Vine's responsibility to provide the John boats for transporting the bales to shore. Bobby Joe was trusted by the executives of the smuggling operation. He was also entrusted to recruit helpers at the creek bank and other tasks. Since Billy Joe was unfamiliar with the Sandy Creek area, he relied on the recommendations of Bay County native David Goodwin.
As manager of a popular restaurant and lounge in Tallahassee, I made lots of friends. From choir boys to criminals, I met all types. I met David Goodwin there. He was no choir boy. David's trade was smuggling weed, and he was pretty good at it. However, not as good as some other friends of mine. Nevertheless, I knew that one day David Goodwin would help me make a fortune.
My name is Donald Baldwin. In 1976, I met Bobby Joe Vines. Mr. Vines was a neighbor in the Tallahassee apartment complex where I lived. When Vines learned that I was an agent in the FBI, he began to ask if I would like to know about a marijuana smuggling operation in a nearby county. I ignored his offers for info many times until the day he showed me a bale of pot.
Trust is a rare commodity among criminals. Better than trust a fellow conspirator, Mr. Vines knew it was wiser to plan for a variety of possible outcomes. This lesson was somewhat lost on David Monroe Goodwin, and he would soon regret it.
Bobby Joe Vines knew I had smuggled reefer across the Rio Grande many times. However, when Bobby Joe asked me to help smuggle tons of pot to Florida, I was initially resistant. When I learned that my share of the haul would be 1,000 pounds, it became hard to resist. He wanted me to locate a good landing site and to help find a few reliable helpers.
So far, the smugglers were making slow but steady progress. The offloading was going mostly as planned. Roughly half of the bales were ashore when the sound of nearby gunshots signaled the ruin of their ill-fated plans.
Everybody tries to keep secrets. Shoot, I've got a few of them too. But when I learned about the pot smuggling going down at Sandy Creek, I know that was a secret that could pay off real good. So, I asked my pal, Douglas Hood, if he wanted to go see what was happening. He said, sure, if I can bring my girlfriend. Of course, I was thinking that I'd take along a little something extra myself.
Me and my sister Sandy were about to go home when Doug asked me if I would go with him to Sandy Creek. I told him okay if my sister could go too. Doug said they were going to get a lot of weed somewhere in the woods, but mostly Doug just wanted to make out in George's camper. He promised us that we'd get home before the sun came up.
39-year-old Harold Sims probably felt very lucky when the headlights of his pickup truck illuminated a hippie van and a large box truck just a few hundred yards from Sandy Creek. He was sure that they could spare a bale or two of reefer just to keep his mouth shut. It's most likely that Mr. Sims underestimated the size of the enterprise and the possibility of an armed guard providing security service. Harold Sims would soon meet Walter Gale Steinhorst.
Bobby Joe Vines hired me to be a lookout for any locals that might stumble upon the trucks as they were being loaded. When I saw the headlights of the old pickup coming up the dirt road, I was surprised. Honestly, I didn't expect anyone to be out in weather so miserable. I was even more surprised to see an old redneck with a teenage girl. However, I wasn't surprised when the old boy fired his sawed-off shotgun at me. I expect he was surprised when I returned fire with my .38 Magnum and hit him in the chest.
Harold Sims died instantly with a bullet through his heart. Sandy McAdams began to scream and shake uncontrollably. Seconds later, Douglas Hood and Sheila McAdams came bounding out of the old camper. Waving his revolver at the horrified intruders, Walter Steinhorst told them to shut up and get in the van. Steinhorst began tying their hands with strips of fabric that he had ripped from an old t-shirt that he found in the van.
When I heard the gunshots, my heart sank and I got sick to my stomach. I knew that Walter was guarding one of the cargo trucks by my van. Bobby Joe said, "Go see what's going on." Each step made me more nervous. I was praying that it was nothing, but I had recognized the sound of a shotgun. In my heart, I knew it was going to be bad. When I got near the old truck, I could see someone hanging halfway out of the passenger door. When I saw his face, I could tell at an instant he was dead. I had to force myself not to vomit. Walter shouted at me, "Go get Charlie."
I didn't want to have nothing to do with Walter Steinhorst that morning. I just wanted to keep loading bales of marijuana. So, when I saw Goodwin coming back up the trail, I could tell the news was bad. David was very upset when he told me that Walter wanted me to come to the van. I told him I was just going to stay right where I was. I don't know what David thought I could do anyway. Just then, Bobby Joe asked me to go see what Walter wanted.
David Goodwin was a wreck. He could barely tell me what he saw. I tried to calm him down. But then, Dave Capo came up and I told him what happened with Walter. He got almost as nervous as Goodwin. Capo went straight to Captain Pete and told him. They wanted to pull the plug on the rest of the haul. Not me, I wanted to finish. We were half done. Just a few more hours and we would have the second truck full. As we were arguing, I looked up to see Charlie coming back.
When I got back to the creek bank, Goodwin, Cruz, and Bobby Joe were squabbling about what to do. When I told them that Steinhorst had 3 teenagers tied up in the back of David's van, they all just stared at me. After a moment, Bobby Joe asked me what was Walter going to do. I told them that Walter insisted that I help him solve the problem that we were all in. first thing Walter wanted was some rope to finish tying up the girls and the boy. Billy Joe gave Goodwin a piece of ski rope and said, "Here, take this to Walter."
Charlie Hughes talked me into this screwed up operation, and he can damn well help get me out. I didn't want to shoot that old boy, but he drawed on me first. Now, we're in a hell of a jam, and Hughes and everybody else better play their part, or there's gonna be hell to pay.
Once fully aware of the gravity of the situation, offloading of the remaining bales was halted. An impromptu plan by Walter Steinhorst was put into action. Walter was the only one with a firearm, and he used that advantage to assume authority and assign new roles. Steinhorst informed Charlie Hughes that it was his job to drive the teens to a remote location and set them free. David Goodwin was to remain behind and supervise the cleanup detail. Billy Joe Vines would drive the full truck to Havana and stash the cargo there. Weeks earlier, Billy Joe had rented an old barn in Havana, a rural community near Tallahassee.
Steinhorst said he would go with me in the van. He assured everyone that we would release the teens deep in the woods somewhere. Once I got behind the wheel of the van, I asked him where he wanted to go. He told me, the watering hole sink in Taylor County, near Perry, Florida. That seemed like an awfully long drive just to find an isolated location. So I asked him, "What are you planning to do?" Walter made a pistol of his fist and whispered, "Pow, pow, pow."
The fate of the 3 teenage intruders was now set. Steinhorst and Hughes drove to the watering hole sink and forced their captives out of the van. Steinhorst told Hughes to drive to Perry and buy 20 concrete blocks and some wire. Charlie did as he was told and began to follow the rutted path back to the highway when he heard several gunshots. After making the purchases, Charlie returned to the sinkhole to find 4 dead bodies neatly lined up near the water's edge. Together, they wired 5 blocks onto each victim and then slid their remains into the 80-foot deep sinkhole.
For nearly 9 months, there was no indication of what happened to 4 Springfield residents that all disappeared on the same day. I was certain that I knew what happened. There was no doubt in my mind that Billy Joe Vines was involved somehow. He had assumed the role of an FBI informant and reported to me that a major smuggling operation was going down on the same weekend that 4 people disappeared. In August 1977, the remains of the missing individuals were discovered by sport divers in a Florida sinkhole. That's when the FBI issued a "Be on the lookout for" bulletin on Bobby Joe Vines.
On the morning of September 6, 1977, Bobby Joe Vines was apprehended on the U.S.-Mexico border at El Paso, Texas. Right away, he began to claim special rights as an informant for the FBI. For 2 weeks, Bobby Joe and federal agents negotiated his status as a witness in a federal investigation into major smuggling operations in Florida. Mr. Vines was granted full immunity from prosecution if he agreed to spill the beans on his fellow conspirators. Billy Joe's precautionary efforts were paying off rather handsomely, as he was assured that he would be allowed to keep all the cash he gained from the sale of his portion of the tainted weed.
As state attorney, it is my responsibility to prosecute the guilty parties in the Sandy Creek murder trial. I believe Walter Gale Steinhorst is the man that killed Harold Sims, 39, Douglas Glenn Hood, 21, Sheila McAdams, 16, and Sandy McAdams, 14. I intend to prove that the stocky, Live Oak, Florida native was on guard on the night of January 23, 1977, and committed 4 murders.
State Attorney Jones announced simultaneously with the Florida Department of Law Enforcement that 8 men were being charged with the murders of Sims, Hood, and the McAdams sisters. Another 9 would be charged later. That occasion would be the last time that Jones and the FDLE would be on speaking terms. Each agency claimed credit for the arrests and murder charges. They would later become bitter opponents after a grand jury presentment in November 1977 accused the FDLE of being partly to blame for the murders.
As grand jury foreman, I reported to the court that many members of the grand jury were upset with the state attorney's office for offering plea deals to so many of the defendants. I told the court that there was a boatload of evidence to warrant prosecution of all the alleged participants in the smuggling operation. Also, many grand jury members were very critical of the FBI and the Florida Department of Law Enforcement for failing to communicate with local law enforcement.
In the end, only 3 defendants would be tried for murder. Walter Gale Steinhorst would be charged and convicted of first-degree murder of Harold Sims, Douglas Hood, and the McAdams sisters. Charles Hughes and David Goodwin were charged and convicted of first-degree murder of Douglas Hood and the McAdams sisters. Walter Gale Steinhorst and David Goodwin were convicted and sentenced to death in Florida's electric chair. Charles Hughes was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to 15 years and served 5 years. Steinhorst died in prison while awaiting execution, while Goodwin had his death sentence commuted to life on appeal. Bobby Joe Vines, the orchestrator of the smuggling operation at Sandy Creek, was convicted of no crimes and was even allowed to keep the money he gained by the sale of his portion of the contraband. Some estimate that Vines' share amounted to as much as $300,000. May 2nd, 2017, at the age 70, David Monroe Goodwin walked out of Everglades Correctional Institute a free man. It took 40 years to bring closure to a case that sorely tried the emotional strength of the victims' families. Moreover, Sandy Creek tested the faith of local citizens in law enforcement and the judiciary.
In the quiet of a January night, where Sandy Creek lay still, a clandestine plan took flight with dreams of a smuggler's thrill. David Monroe Goodwin, a name entwined in the tale of shadows and dread, a night where fate was unkind and 4 lives were left for dead. Harold Sims, a man of 39, Douglas Hood, just 21, Sister Sandy and Sheila in their prime, their lives abruptly and undone. A smuggling scheme gone awry as innocents stumbled near in the darkness under the sky. Their fate became crystal clear. Steinhorst, with a heart of stone, pulled the trigger without remorse. Goodwin, though not alone, played a part in this tragic course. Bound by fear and threats of death, he brought the rope under duress. A night that stole their final breath left the community in distress. Years passed and justice saw Goodwin sentenced to life confined, paroled but forever caught in memories that bind. In the shadows of Sandy Creek, echoes of that fateful night, lives lost and hearts that seek a semblance of the light.